Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The stories continue coming out of Barcelona for this pre-season private test. Multiple laps again completed today with no reliability issues, it seems, at all so far for some of the key players in this sport. Red Bull powertrains, their brand new engine, no issues yesterday, no issues at least so far today. Ferrari's power unit looking particularly reliable as well, but in terms of car performance, all eyes once again are on Mercedes. Lots of talk about their car yesterday and the lap times they were putting in, and some of the simulator correlations, which apparently could be even better for the W17 than initially thought. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I'd greatly appreciate it. Earlier video than normal today. I'm traveling later today, so I'll give you guys updates on everything that's happening when we get the chance, but there's plenty to talk about today already, and we're going to start here. So Aston Martin, just when I uploaded yesterday's video really, confirmed they will not be here in time for Wednesday, so you can run on 3 of these 5 days. They are currently looking to only run on 2 of those 5 days. They're not going to be there until Thursday. This is obviously not ideal. Assuming they get there in time to at least do some running, that will be beneficial. Of course, better than what Williams are doing, which is nothing. They didn't make it in time. But there's been lots of talk about this, because is this a positive or is this not? We know that Newey arrived later than they would have liked. There was issues with the simulator correlation back at the factory that they needed to resolve, so things have been pushed back to some degree, but also, as Dekesa describes, Newey has very specific ideas, and ideas that often can be difficult to implement. The genius Newey isn't easy to interpret while he imposes his ideas. So the car is, as Dekesa also describes, maybe the most anticipated car. Brand new regulations, to see what Newey's come up with. Imagine like he's gone for a pull rod front suspension or something, like something different to what all the other teams have done. It'd be very, very fascinating. I'm sure that the car is going to have lots of features and lots of interesting details that we are probably not seeing on many other cars anyway elsewhere. Now, you can take the negative of this, and that's understandable, but also Aston Martin will say, look, we're being very ambitious. This is a slightly different scenario to Williams, whereby their delays have been caused by them just messing up big time, whereas Aston's delays are kind of more deliberate or something. I still think there are some negatives, though, here, right? Because at the end of the day, there have been some delays, and it's, I think there was some description that it's not been, not everything went smoothly, right? So there have been some integrations that have taken longer than expected. There have been some mistakes made along the way. So it's not like this is clean running, and it's not like they're going to arrive at the first testing in Melbourne with a car that's at the weight limit, we believe. But for the long-term success of Aston Martin, I think there's better takeaways here than there are for, let's say, Williams, because on the Aston Martin side, the belief is that they were kind of pushing the boundaries, whereas on the Williams side, it was like, there were just delays happening for reasons of major mistakes internally. But again, that's just the kind of public perception about it. What's actually happening behind the scenes could be very different, and we do have an update from Williams, not from them themselves, but from Auto Racer, that say they have now passed the crash tests. But of course, to do so, they've added a lot of weight onto the chassis. We talked yesterday that they could be 20 to 30 kilos over the weight limit, but that has been not refuted exactly, but the source that mentioned that has now taken that out of their discussion. So we just don't really know right now. What we do know is that Aston Martin say that we're still going to probably be there just about in time. Williams say, we can't make it, lads. We'll see you in Bahrain for the first proper test in February if they can get a car ready to go for then. But these were the final testing numbers for yesterday. So some people do still have access to the live timing. It's not publicly available anymore, but Soy Motor, they do seemingly have access to it. These were the times from yesterday, and really it's not about the times at this point. The times, however, are somewhat relevant, and we'll discuss them in a second. But Isaac Hadjar tops the list, 108 laps in the Red Bull with a 1 minute 18.1 as his fastest time. Now, the pole time last year was in like the 111s, so it ain't about the lap times, right? It's more about the laps completed. And it's very impressive, the level of reliability here. That first day of testing in 2014, when the power units first came in, they did 100 laps, basically, between all the teams. That's all they got done. Whereas yesterday, most teams were putting in 100 laps themselves, if not more. Ocon in the Haas did 154 laps. Like, that is quite the day out for the first day of a test with brand new power units, right? Now, Red Bull Is that the most impressive of all of them, right? Their day? I'm sure that Christian Horner is somewhere feeling pretty, maybe not smug is the right word. We don't know how strong the engine will be. And of course, none of these engines are turned up anywhere near the max. But it's still impressive, right? For Red Bull powertrains to come out day one, Lawson to do 88 laps in the Racing Bulls, Hadjar to do 108 laps and set the fastest time in the Red Bull. It's difficult to imagine it could have gone much better than that for a brand new power unit manufacturer, with all the questions about the quality and the reliability and all these other things. Now, the Mercedes also ran very smoothly. Russell, Alpine, Mercedes, for Antonelli as well. Cadillac, of course, Ferrari powered. They didn't do too many laps, but they also had no issues. So, the Haas, Cadillac, and Audi, they were the only team to have some reliability problems. But even then, 28 laps, it's not great, but it's not an absolute disaster by any means. They did have an issue, Audi. They spent hours diagnosing it. They did diagnose what the cause of the problem was, but then they decided to leave it until they can actually resolve it properly rather than getting back out on the track. Don't want to take any unnecessary risk, understandably so. It is testing, but it was just surprising maybe to see this level of reliability, given that, as I say, in 2014 they did like 90 laps between them, and between the teams here they did well over 600 between the teams yesterday. Today's a bit different. It's raining, so some teams aren't going to decide to run, and we'll discuss that in a second. But all this talk about, it's got to be behind closed doors because the teams, they're going to get exposed, all the cars are going to be on fire and all of this. Like, it doesn't seem like that's happened at all. The reliability seems fairly good, and there should be a positive sign for some teams, right? Certainly, and look, even if the cars break down this afternoon after I've recorded this video, still, the opening signs are pretty solid, right? Now, at the time, Mercedes had done the most laps of anyone, then Ferrari, then Red Bull slightly behind them. But Hadjar and Red Bull, they had a lot of optimism to take away. Hadjar says, surprisingly, we did more laps than we expected. Everything went well. It is quite impressive considering our first day with our own power unit. So, look, the power unit for Red Bull has mainly been the key question. From an aerodynamic perspective, we'll see what they come up with. Of course, Honda have done 0 laps yet because they're with Aston Martin, so their reliability is still a question. But we've talked about it with the weight of the cars to some degree as well. These cars do appear to be somewhat lighter than maybe we expected, as in, I was thinking almost every team, maybe with the exception of 1 or 2, will be 10 kilos over the weight limit or something. It looks like multiple teams are going to be within just a couple of kg of the weight limit, and we expected this era of engine regulations to bring up potential massive unreliability issues, which I'm sure we will have, don't get me wrong, especially when they start to probably crank the engines up, we are going to have reliability issues, obviously. But it doesn't feel like things are as bad as maybe some of the doomsday predictions indicated initially. It's, funky that the teams aren't allowing us to see anything in Barcelona, but apparently the teams booked this themselves, like they paid for it or something, so they call the shots, apparently. So anyway, Red Bull look pretty happy about themselves. However, yes, Red Bull might have a reliable engine, as might Ferrari, but that also seems true for Mercedes, of course. And what about the actual strength of the car? Now, Hadjar was half a second faster than George Russell was, but that doesn't tell the entire story. So, some people say the car is good, but it's like, well, all right, how much do we read into that? What we do have is some information on lap times. Cameron pointed this out, that there was a report that suggested Russell's 118.6 was on the C1 tyre, whereas Hadjar's 118.1 was on the C2 or the C3. Now, we're not really sure, but that indicates, given that there should be a big delta there, and actually they are trying, at least Pirelli say, to create a bigger delta this year between the tyre compounds. They want the delta to be more than half a second. The last few years it's kind of, they try to aim for half a second. This year they're aiming for more like 0.8 of a second delta between the compounds, which hopefully will be successful and will be a good thing. But that would mean that Russell's, maybe Russell's lap was the most impressive lap of the day, would be the takeaway from this. The other somewhat concerning thing, if you're a fan of another team, again, we've not even seen McLaren hit the track yet. We don't really know what Ferrari's B-spec car is going to look like. But the race point out that apparently the W17 feels better on the track than in the simulator. And we know how optimistic Mercedes were just generally arriving here to this circuit. the talk they had going into these few days, all the social media posts that they were doing, it feels like the team was full of confidence about this W17, and then they turn up to the track and the car's even better than they thought. Chauvelin says in a number of areas it's actually feeling better to them on the track than they were feeling in the sim. Certainly encouraging. I'm sure that we'll make progress over the next few days, as it does seem like we can get in a sensible place for the first race. And apparently a big question mark the team had has been resolved. So, look, we don't know anything about real performance right now. All we know is about feeling. The teams themselves will not really have any idea where anyone else is sitting either. But what the drivers do know is that they think this car's pretty damn good. And a lot of the drivers had similar things to say. So there was some reaction from the drivers to the shakedown. Now, of course, you've always got to recognise there is going to be a positive spin on a lot of this type of stuff. They're not going to say massively negative things about the cars immediately, certainly not about their own team. Bottas says it's a very big difference to before, the way that the cars handle differently. You've got a bit less load in the high-speed corners. With the power unit, you've got so much more torque out of the corners, but then you've got to manage the battery. He told that to the official F1 channel, so kind of, back and forth on that one. Isaac Hadjar says the car's handling is improved. There's less load, but it's more predictable compared to the other cars. They're more simple, hopefully more nimble, more agile, more easy to play around with them. On the PU side, there are more options to play around with. Very interesting. Russell says the amount of power they give is very impressive. Probably the quickest that I've ever seen an F1 car pass here at Barcelona. Like, the acceleration out of corners of these cars is going to be insane. But also it means that the tyres have more work to do, and they're thinner than before. So maybe we will get more two-stop races if the tyres are going to be more under pressure. That's a possibility. So I think we're in for a fascinating year. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of cons, potentially, about these cars and about the way that they race, but there should be a lot of positives as well. Russell says the cars definitely feel like they are smaller, and of course they are smaller, but they're not radically smaller to where they were before, so the question is, will it really improve the racing, or, if maybe the drivers feel like they can go for a gap that they wouldn't be able to go for before, maybe that's going to lead to some more dramatic racing, shall we say. But Russell says it's gone in a good direction, and he also says you can feel the weight reduction. The other thing I think that Craig Scarborough is pointing out is that, yes, these cars are lighter by regulation. They're 30 kilos lighter minimum weight, but they are also carrying 40 kilograms less fuel at the start of a race, only 70 kg rather than 110. So at the start of a race especially, the cars are 70 kilos lighter than they would usually be, which is a big deal in terms of racing in the opening laps. Now, Mercedes decided it's raining, we're not going to run, right? We will save that running. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing to get some running in the wet, but I guess they already did 200 kilometres at Silverstone the other day in the wet, so probably this makes some degree of sense. This I don't believe is a shot from today, but it is a shot of the Haas with the active aero deployed, so you can see people are still going to call out the DRS, aren't they? It's going to be difficult to get away from that. But that is, it is a drag reducing system, like a drag reduction system. But the front wing is notably kind of flat here. It doesn't seem to be quite as outrageous as what that Ferrari was doing at Fiorano the other day. But we do have Max Verstappen on the track for the first time. If in case you hadn't realised, this is a photograph taken by a photographer from Soy Motor, just to point that out if you guys are unaware. But you can see that the Red Bull hits the track for the first time and has an aero rake on. And I don't think we've seen, surprisingly yesterday, I don't think I saw any team with an aero rake on. They're running little cotton threads and stuff, and the pitot tubes. But yeah, the aero rakes are officially out. This is what Max looks like behind the wheel of the Red Bull Racing car, the RB22 for the upcoming season. He was getting on pretty well, putting some laps in. It does appear that he was off the track. This actually is some footage of him around the final couple of corners. Again, I think the police, apparently there's even police helicopters doing the rounds at Catalunya right now to stop people videoing and all this. But this is a pretty great shot actually of what looks like anyway the final couple of corners. Verstappen takes the top position at the time. He was at a 120. This is before it rained. So they did get some running in before the rain came down. But because Mercedes decided, well, it's going to rain at some point, we might as well not bother. Max was still driving it in the wet as well. Now, good chance to drive it in the wet because, as I say, these cars have so much torque, they're not going to be easy to drive in the wet conditions. Now, Max, of course, he is a maestro in the wet. That is not going to be too much of a concern for him, you would think. However, he did cause a red flag, we think. Now, this guy said Verstappen's Red Bull is smoking. To our understanding, this was fake news. What we think happened is that he went off track somewhere, went into the gravel. The car was either needed to be recovered briefly, or it was maybe he just went off and he was able to get it going again, but they red flagged it. So it's not a massive deal. I know that some were saying, oh, well, you know, is the car designed for Isaac Hadjar, right? It's not made for Max this year. But look, he had an off, he went into the gravel, he had a spin, whatever. We don't have any footage of it, of course, but the red flag was caused because the Soy Motor guys have access to this live timing, so they know that the red flag was caused, and Verstappen was the only man on the track. It seems they went off somewhere. That was at least the discussion that was had at the time. So not a massive deal. But the only guys on track, at least this morning, were Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. So Ferrari are out there as well, putting some laps in. And a couple of takeaways before we talk about the overall conclusion from the morning. In Spain, the SF26 will be the same exact car that ran at Fiorano. So it's interesting, this Ferrari. Some are saying it looks very basic. There's a lot of developments they will still make on this car. It definitely does look less developed than the Mercedes, I think I would say. But that is probably for a reason, because the car is less developed than the Mercedes, at least this version they're running. They're calling it a primordial version. It's not an exaggerated description. The floor is already old. It's a version the car had in the CFD back in autumn. So, you know, this is purely from a reliability perspective. They are doing the running here. Now, apparently this is because they're actually waiting for some clarifications. Now, this is quite interesting, and it shows that Ferrari will be taking some risks and pushing the limits in some regards, because they seemingly have some ideas, and they're speaking to the FIA and saying, okay, we want to try this. What do you think? Can we do it or not? And, well, the FIA is going to make a decision on that. But it has slowed, apparently, some developmental paths and forced compromises on some update components. And as a result, you know, with key areas of the rule still open to interpretation, it's not going to be a radical Spec B precisely when we get to Melbourne, but it will be a significantly more developed car. And apparently the car will be near enough the minimum weight as well, which will be impressive if Ferrari get to that point. So, look, the cars seem pretty reliable so far. That's all the key takeaways. We can't talk too much about performance so far. As I say, Mercedes are pretty confident. This was the morning summary out of Soy Motor. Leclerc and Verstappen were the only ones doing any running. It was dry, then it was wet. There was a red flag. It was, turn 5. So he went off at turn 5, basically, which I think was the corner where he crashed into Russell, wasn't it? Isn't that turn 5 at Barcelona? I think it is. So maybe got the braking slightly wrong there. Anyway, best time in the dry was for Max. Leclerc was slightly behind. In the wet, they were doing, Max did a 1:38, Leclerc did a 1:32. Leclerc did 64 laps in the morning, Max at 27. So, so far, and as it continues, Ferrari are the team with the most laps of anyone on their power unit. So the running this afternoon is now getting underway. Hamilton's out there on the full wet tyres, Hadjar's out there again in the Red Bull, and we'll see what happens tomorrow, whether other teams are back on track, whether McLaren take to the track would be exciting to see, because, look, there's only 3 more days of testing to go. Aston Martin, are they going to get there in time? What's the state of affairs with Williams? There's other questions to be had there too. But very much interested in your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.